On this edition of the CBS Video Library of World War II, we will look back at some of the events which set the stage for this massive conflict. 4 separate episodes comprise the story we've entitled The Seeds of War. We'll go back to the Germany of the 1920s and see firsthand the chaos, economic and political, which paved the way for the coming to power of Adolf Hitler. We will examine the war between China and Japan and see how the Japanese invasion unleashed events which led ultimately to Pearl Harbor. Munich figures prominently as a trigger to World War II. We'll go there and recount what happened to Czechoslovakia in a chapter titled Crisis at Munich. And we'll look into our own backyard during this period of time as we focus on America's response to the growing threat of a foreign war and President Roosevelt's unprecedented quest for a 3rd term. We begin with the story of a democracy that failed, Germany's Weimar Republic, struggling to hang on in the turbulent post-World War I years, torn by fantastic extremes of inflation and depression, doomed from the beginning. The story from Kaiser to Führer.
As World War I grinds to a close in November 1918, war-weary Germany is dissolving into near anarchy. Strikes to end the war unexpectedly end the monarchy too, and a republic is proclaimed. The new government is unprepared for responsibility. Civil war breaks out as demobilized servicemen and civilians join the radical Spartacist movement, which tries to emulate Bolshevik Russia's example. Private armies spring up as the weak caretaker government asks protection from the old high command, which recruits volunteers to put down the communist riots. The Spartacists defeated, delegates come to the city of Weimar to organize a permanent republic. Such power is strange to Germans. They act, says one observer, like clerks called trembling into the main office. The new government is already beholden to the General Staff for help in the Civil War. Under its assembly-appointed first president, Social Democrat Friedrich Ebert, Germany finds the outward form of democracy. Irreconcilable forces work to destroy the uncertain republic. The leftists, especially the communists, continue to foment unrest. Political strikes are called and are bloodily put down. The average German is no world revolutionist, but jobs are few, inflation is growing, and the punishing Versailles Treaty is draining Germany economically. Now the right-wing extremists see their opportunity to undermine the young republic. In 1920, militarists led by Wolfgang Kapp seized power in Berlin and forced the weak government to flee. Only a nationwide strike causes the Kapp putsch to collapse after 4 days. But the government, fearing the communists more, continues to make common cause with the generals. In 1923, Germany is invaded by the French and Belgians. They claim she has delayed reparations payments and they occupy her industrial heart, the Ruhr Valley. The occupiers impose an economic blockade. It practically severs from Germany not only the Ruhr, but much of the industrial Rhineland, which is held by the British and other Allied forces. Chaos results, with German production curtailed, commercial activity at a standstill, inflation runs wild. 1 billion marks for a loaf of bread. Workers' wages can't keep up with the daily rise in prices. 49,000 marks to the dollar, then 100,000, 200 million marks to the dollar, 4 trillion. The mint works round the clock to print and overprint paper money. $120 billion marks for a piece of herring. 300 billion marks for a half-pound of apples. The inflation wipes out the middle class, which relies on fixed salaries and bank savings. There are times, records a writer, when I want to scream aloud and run away from the pictures of horror which haunt me like hallucinations. Not everyone suffers. Speculators in real estate grow rich, and big industrialists pay off old loans, buy equipment, and expand. Only goods have any real value. What money you have, you spend before it's worthless. Everything's for sale. The tragedy of Germany's inflation breeds many extremist parties which try to give answers to its sufferers. One of these parties, in Bavaria, is the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, who blame the Republic, the Allies, and the Jews for everything. Nazi leader Adolf Hitler, who has watched his party expand from a handful to thousands, calls for action. On November 8, 1923, in this Munich beer hall, he proclaims a national revolution. He's arrested and sent to Landsberg prison for 5 years. History will someday laughingly tear up this verdict, he predicts. He's right. He's freed in 9 months, just long enough to write a blueprint for conquest, Mein Kampf.
Disheartened by democracy, Germany was hungry for leadership. After a succession of weak chancellors, there came the forceful Gustav Stresemann, a nationalist but one who supported the Republic. His primary aim was to stabilize the currency.
Stresemann succeeds with strong measures reinforced by the Dawes Plan of foreign assistance, named for its prime mover, American financier Charles Dawes. The Republic is reprieved. Upon the death of President Ebert in 1925, the nation again shows its disunity and its fears of freedom in an election campaign to choose its next president. Over half a dozen political parties appeal to the public with promises and threats. For the first time in history, Germans go to the polls to elect a president. Expressing the deep-seated feelings of a people who worship duty and power above all, they choose 77-year-old Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, an honored memory from the imperial past. The national rifts are soon concealed by Germany's phenomenal recovery from the inflation. The Allies evacuate her industrial areas and production booms. Stresemann, now foreign minister, ushers her into the League of Nations and fosters friendship with her former enemies who become her best customers. And so it seems that the smoke from her industry has forever blotted out Germany's past history and problems, just as her much heralded accomplishments, such as the Graf Zeppelin, are making the world forget her past. In the middle and late 1920s, Germany symbolizes peaceful progress. Perhaps her military budget seems overlarge for so small an army, and there are reports that military pilots are being trained by her commercial airline. But these are mere ripples on the wave of prosperity which carries lovely German liners like the Europa back and forth to America. In the flush of abundance, many skeptical Germans now admit that democracy and the Republic aren't so bad after all. Don't listen to those who say the poor are as poor as ever, or say that this prosperity is a fool's paradise based on foreign loans. Let's go for a swim. On the surface, it is all froth and feathers. But there are some who see the truth and worry. The artists whose eyes are not glazed by the prosperity. They record the dissolute nightlife, the profiteers, and the festering hatreds. So sees artist George Gross. And there are others who see beneath the surface. The ugliness, inhumanity, absurdity of people. Blank-eyed, open-headed, animal-like, ready to grab everything they can. Expressionist artists Vasily Kandinsky and Max Pechstein vividly depict, too, the other side of the coin. And famed Käthe Kollwitz records how many Germans still suffer and have little hope even in these prosperous times. A society with grave inequality, Germany nevertheless enjoys a cultural rebirth. Even the staid, nationalistic universities feel the fresh breeze and belatedly recognize the Republic's existence. They confer honorary degrees on its officials, such as Foreign Minister Stresemann. Democratic Germany provides the free atmosphere for a novelist like Thomas Mann to write his masterpiece, The Magic Mountain. Other writers, Heinrich Mann, Arnold Zweig, Bertolt Brecht, and Emil Ludwig, flourish here. And scientists such as Albert Einstein. These years see the fullest flowering of German art and science in generations. The German theater gives birth to director Max Reinhardt and to composer Kurt Weill. And the world's movie audiences applaud German films with Elizabeth Bergner, Emil Jannings, Conrad Veidt, and Marlene Dietrich. Such extravaganzas as Metropolis, with its warning of men become slaves to machines, stuns the world's public with their power. cringing men are devoured by their master. Again, the artist sees what the German public fails or fears to foresee. A master for Germany is indeed waiting for his call. Maddeningly, for Adolf Hitler, it is being delayed by the prosperous times. But Hitler can still collect a crowd, for there are enough disgruntled people in Germany. What's more, he's something to see, an oddity. Disregard what he says, Berlin society exclaims. Just watch him. He has a style all his own. From brown shirts to the other end of the political rainbow, the Reds are waiting too for the prosperity to end. In the middle, there is the large mass of Germans who now want democracy to work, but the extremists keep the police busy. Contributions to the Nazi Party fall so low that stormtroopers join soup lines. These are the followers of Hitler, waiting. Hold on, he urges them. Your time will come. But why disturb oneself over politics, say the well-heeled Germans, when there's tea dancing to enjoy? Theirs is a world built on sand, and now the world begins to crumble. It is 1929, Depression. Intellectuals and the prosperous middle class are faced again with economic disaster. By the end of 1929, Stresemann is dead, foreign loans and trade dwindle, and unemployment grows. All of Germany's maladies and latent passions come to the surface as the jobless count rises from 2 million to 6 million. By 1932, when Hindenburg comes up for re-election as president, the change in mood is apparent. His chief opponent is Adolf Hitler, whose party has risen from 9th to 2nd place. The communists, too, gain greatly, and this fact Hitler uses to obtain huge funds from the frightened industrialists. He mocks the Republic and its confusion of squabbling parties.
34 Parteien, die Arbeiterschaft, ihre eigenen Parteien, und zwar nicht eine, das wäre zu wenig, es müssen gleich 3, 4 sein. Das Bürgertum, das noch intelligenter ist, braucht daher noch mehr Parteien. Der Mittelstand muss seine Parteien haben. Die Wirtschaft ihre Parteien. Der Landmann auch die eigene Partei, und zwar auch gleich 3, 4. Und die Herren Hausbesitzer müssen ihre besonderen Interessen politischer Art, weltanschaulicher Art, auch durch eine Partei vertreten lassen. Und die Herren Mieter natürlich können dann nicht zurückbleiben. Und die Katholiken auch eine eigene Partei und die Protestanten eine Partei. Und die Bayern eine Partei und die Thüringer eine eigene Partei. Und die Württemberger noch eine besondere Spezialpartei. Und so weiter. 34 in einem Ländchen.
In this crucial presidential campaign, and in deference to his industrial backers, Hitler drops his attacks on big business. He concentrates instead on the Jews, 1% of the population, whom he links with the communists and foreigners and blames for all of Germany's troubles. Every vote counts as the aged and the sick are brought to the polls in the battle between Hitler and Hindenburg. Hindenburg, ironically, is now supported by the parties who want to save democracy in Germany. During the voting and tabulating, there is bloodshed in the streets as Nazi stormtroopers, Hitler's private army, assault those who oppose them or support the Republic. But when the counting is over, Hindenburg wins, 19 million to 13 million. Hitler's anger rises. Determined as he is to rule, he refuses to risk revolution, remembering his Munich fiasco. What he now needs is a conspirator on the inside to help him. Hindenburg despises Hitler as an upstart, but 84 years old and failing, he is easily influenced by his military and industrial friends who are negotiating with Hitler, confident they can control the Nazis. Hindenburg will betray the trust of those who look to him to save the Republic. He will submit to a deal made by his favorite, ex-Chancellor Franz von Papen, precisely the arch-conspirator Hitler needs to ascend to power legally. January 30th, 1933. About to enter smiling, the new Vice-Chancellor, Franz von Papen. Greeting him, the beneficiary of the deal, Adolf Hitler, just appointed by President Hindenburg as the new German Chancellor. Nationalist leader Hugenberg indicates conservative distaste for Hitler. He'd rather not sit next to him. Nazi Hermann Goering sits cheek by jowl to Hitler. He knows where the power lies. That night, a Nazi victory parade for the Fuhrer and for the end of the 14-year-old republic. The old president, soon to die, watches. The upstart has made it. Darkness has descended, casting its shadow on the world. It will be 12 bloody years before another dawn in Germany.
Darkness also had descended on the other side of the world, in Asia. In 1931, tiny but expansionist-minded Japan took Manchuria. In 1933, the Japanese moved into China itself. By mid-August of 1937, they attacked Shanghai, China's great coastal port. The big war in Asia had begun. Pearl Harbor was still 4 years away. Let's go back now for a look at the Japan of the 1930s when the shooting began.
This is the enemy. At home, Tokyo, the mid-30s. Japan is a mixture of old and new. An agrarian, mercantile nation adapting itself to Western science, to modern methods of trade and finance. On the surface, a peaceful people, traditionally polite, industrious. But underneath, Japan is bursting, overcrowded. The ambitious rising group of militarists, through intrigue and assassination, have become politically dominant. In league with them is the new financial oligarchy, the Zaibatsu. Together they believe in the credo of expansion stated by General Tanaka in his infamous memorial, conquest through a policy of blood and iron. Today, China, tomorrow, the world. The appetite of the Japanese is big. China, 3 million square miles, 500 million people, a mouthful for any conqueror. Yet the appetizer, Manchuria, has gone down well. In 1931, the militarists captured Manchuria from Chinese warlords, set up a puppet government called Manchukuo. The province is rich in raw materials. Its people, without real allegiance or direction, are helpless. The Japanese plunder, use the Chinese for forced labor. The rest of the world is dismayed, but takes no action. Many believe World War II begins here. In 1933, the Japanese move into China proper, south of the Great Wall, supposed barricade against barbarians. They create more incidents, pour in opium, seek to destroy by degrading and dividing. China is already split. Since 1927, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists have been fighting the Chinese communists. Now in 1935, the communists reach Yan'an after their long march. Taking their cue from Moscow, they seek a united front with Chiang against Japan. Their leader is Mao Zedong. This pressure for a united front leads to the kidnapping of Chiang Kai-shek by northern warlords in 1936. Communists help free him for the sake of national unity. Chiang makes no commitment, but the nationalists and communists tacitly agree to join in fighting the common enemy, Japan. In the summer of 1937, the Japanese seize Beiping. Their next objective, Shanghai, with its international settlement and French concession, guarded by American, British, French, and Japanese troops. Once before, in 1932, the Japanese attacked Shanghai. The other powers intervened to bring peace. Shanghai is perhaps the most cosmopolitan city in the world, with a population of 65,000 Europeans, 3 million Chinese, a third of whom live in the foreign area. It is a treaty port full of contrasts, ancient and modern, plush and poor, grime and gold. A no-holds-barred place. Here Chiang came to power in 1927. Here his friends and foreigners make merry. The Japanese remain aloof, watch and plan. Early in August 1937, they sail their ships up the Wangpu River, anchor in front of the international settlement, point their guns down Shanghai's throat. The Japanese send their Marines ashore to intimidate Chinese citizens, to manufacture incidents. The other powers protest. Clearly unacceptable, a grave affair, say the Japanese. Black Saturday, August 14th. Without warning, Japanese planes strike. Casualties in the congested city are the greatest from any single attack in history as of that date, 1937. A 1.5 million Chinese rush for the international settlement. a haven where foreigners have a ringside seat on the carnage. When standing room gives out, the gates are shut.
Japan expected to capture Shanghai in a few days, but it took 3 months. The world was amazed at Chinese heroism, nerveless resistance. The battle for Shanghai bore out the believers in China's capacity to unite and endure.
The end comes suddenly, like the end of most of these battles. The Japanese land reinforcements to the south move behind the Chinese right flank. By November 9th, the Chinese retreat begins. 2 days later, Armistice Day of World War I, the battle for Shanghai is over, but World War II is much closer. Chinese resistance temporarily breaks down, and the enemy doesn't stop until he reaches Nanking, the capital. Here takes place a modern Carthage, the rape of Nanking, perhaps the greatest single act of savagery in the 20th century. China always has reacted slowly. Nanking leaves the Chinese shattered, morally and militarily. The Japanese gloat, hesitate, wait for Chung to sue for peace. It is one of their great mistakes. Now, with rekindled fervor, the Chinese answer the summons to the life and death struggle. They call it the Hankow spirit. The new capital is 800 miles up the Yangtze from the sea. It becomes the fulcrum for meetings like this all over the countryside. Japan has forgotten that China is a nation. Not for 10 years since Chiang Kai-shek led the revolution against the old Manchu dynasty have the people been so unified behind him. The communists are part of this national response. In Hankow, they share rice bowls with the nationalists, make common military plans. In Yan'an, their northern capital, General Juta organizes red troops, sends his partisans deep into Japanese territory. Mao Zedong, the supreme leader, aims his doctrine at the peasants, whom he knows so well. Himself a peasant, he is the man of ideas, a country boy Lenin, already a tough, seasoned communist. Privately, prophetically, Mao says that the revolution in China will go on long after the Japanese have left. China has lost 250,000 troops since Shanghai, but has some crack soldiers left. Now at Taichung, it's their turn. Taichung is Japan's first big frontal defeat in history. And for 6 months more, the Chinese are able to check the enemy. The Japanese strike for Hankow. The Chinese retaliate by diverting the Yellow River almost by hand. The dikes are opened in 3 places, and thousands of Japanese are trapped by the floods. The Japanese also face a new kind of enemy, the guerrillas, many of them communists. This kind of warfare now becomes a permanent pattern. The Japanese feel that control of the cities and of the lines of communication will paralyze China. They win many victories, but in the end, it is they who are paralyzed, immobilized. Every Chinese man and woman, young or old, becomes a fighter. Every road or bridge, and above all, every railway that may help the Japanese advance is a Chinese target, as important as a fort or as enemy troops themselves. Yet Hankow cannot hold out for long. It falls in the autumn of '38. Most Chinese troops have vacated the city. Even so, it is bombed and battered and burned to the ground. Chung's policy is to trade land for time. Now comes the biggest trade of all. Far off Chungking, at the headwaters of the Yangtze, is chosen as the new capital. It will mean not only the movement of troops, of a government. It will mean a movement of 20 million people with a nation on their backs. The epic trek to the west. Factories, workshops, tons of equipment. All are carried 1,000 miles by the Chinese people, carried toward Chungking. And behind them, the Chinese leave scorched earth. Human backs, legs, and muscle, and human spirit, pull the barges upriver to Chungking. Remote above the last gorge is Chungking. The 20th century has only recently arrived. A water system 7 years ago, electricity 4. Chungking becomes a vast melting pot for Chinese as unlike each other as they are unlike Europeans, but all with a single passion to defeat Japan. Refugee number 1 is Chiang Kai-shek. For him, Chungking will be a place of alternate hope and despair. The city is locked in by land, but defenseless from the air. When the winter fogs lift in April, the Japanese strike by night and by day. The city becomes the most bombed place on Earth. With few anti-aircraft guns or planes, the Chinese have only the natural defense of the city's caves. But they need a warning system, and they devise an ingenious one. When Japanese planes leave Hankow, Chinese agents cut into the telephone lines and tip off secret Chinese radios. An underground network relays the news to Chungking. The shelters are assigned by tickets. It is dugout democracy, and it brings Chungking its greatest dignity. The damage is great, but Chungking survives. Shopkeepers and Sung sisters, Madam Chung on the right, are as one. For Chiang Kai-shek, at the height of his power, the very symbol of resistance, Chungking becomes a beehive and eventually a hornet's nest. Supply is still a tremendous problem. The old road from Burma is woefully inadequate. By camel from Russia, by train from Indochina, by air from Hong Kong, and by smuggling from Japanese-held China, some supplies come in, but not enough. So 70,000 Chinese coolies perform an astonishing feat. With their hands and with crude instruments, they build a new road through deep mountain country from Lashio in Burma to Kunming in China. It takes 2 years to construct, is finished late in 1939. The battle against nature is also against time. When Indochina is lost and when the Russians stop aiding Chung, the Burma Road becomes a major Chinese lifeline. The Japanese know that over the road come supplies for China. For them, it becomes a major target. To defend the Burma Road, General Claire Chennault musters a handful of second-hand planes and builds a volunteer air force, the Flying Tigers. They are the first Americans in this Asian war, so far off and obscure to their countrymen at home.
Many, many more Americans were soon to learn about and become involved in that remote war in Asia. December 7th, 1941 was approaching. But let's go back now to Europe in the days preceding the outbreak of war there. This chapter involved the sacrifice of a free and democratic nation, Czechoslovakia, to appease Adolf Hitler. It's a chapter which gives new meaning to the word appeasement.
1938, the 6th year of the Nazi Revolution. A lightning rebirth, unmatched, unchecked, stirs mounting confidence within Germany, mounting fear throughout the rest of Europe. Fear hammered home by realities. The realities of a once defeated nation retooling for war. The most intensive military buildup of all times. Says Adolf Hitler, those who wish for peace must support the German effort to conquer the world. Hitler's dream, expansion to the east. First, Austria, death by Anschluss on March 12, 1938. Next target, Czechoslovakia, preceded by a demand for the Sudetenland, the lands that separate the country from Germany, as a prelude to total conquest of Czechoslovakia. In the spring of 1938, the young Republic of Czechoslovakia appears, on paper at least, safe from Nazi aggression or intimidation. Under President Edvard Beneš, she enjoys strong defense pacts with France and Russia, a stronghold of democracy. Her people, hard-working and realistic, command world respect. A model republic of 15 million, created by the Versailles Treaty, she is a nation of minorities, working honestly to represent all, Czechs, Slovaks, Magyars, as well as some 3.5 million hostile Sudeten Germans, concentrated along the frontier lands. With Austria overrun, Czechoslovakia guards her borders, alert to the danger of subversion in the towns of the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland, alive with citizens who pride themselves on being Germans, not Czechs, who dream of locking step with the fatherland. Hitler's Trojan horse is here, the excuse by which he can legally invade the Czech Republic. At the head of the Trojan horse is Konrad Henlein, an obedient Nazi puppet, chief of the Sudeten German Party. Henlein has been ordered by Hitler to prepare the way for his occupation of the Sudetenland. Following Hitler's instructions, Henlein demands what the Czechs cannot possibly accept. In effect, the creation in Czechoslovakia of a little Germany. As a war of nerves gathers force, the people of Prague grow apprehensive. Then from Britain and France comes bitter counsel. Concede, appease, satisfy the demands of the Sudeten Nazis. In May, moderation is met with menace as Henlein forms stormtroop battalions to intimidate the Czechs into submission. Now Hitler intensifies the crisis, orders his reluctant generals, unprepared and unwilling to make war just yet, to push up to the Czech border. His aim, to test the Czech spirit and the limits of Allied appeasement. Magnified and played up by the Nazi press, the news of German troop movements is spread to the capitals of the world. But the Czechs will stand firm. Their spirit and resolve is expressed in the words of their president.
Czechoslovakia is prepared to defend her territory and will not voluntarily give up any part of it. The army is equipped with modern arms, and the firm determination of the people to defend their democratic government compensates for what may be lacking in the numerical strength of the army. The soldiers know that they would be defending a just cause.
The Czechs have shown Hitler they will not be intimidated. And to his astonishment, from Paris and London, as well as Moscow, comes warning that invasion means war. In face of such unity, Germany launches a vicious propaganda campaign calculated to break down that unity.
Denn wir sind aus einem Volk, was immer geschieht. Das ist nun einmal so und das wird immer so sein.
Ein Bilddokument aus den letzten Tagen der Bedrückung des Sudetenlandes. Der Sorghof, ein deutsches Bauerngehöft bei Franzensbad, das von den Tschechen vollständig ausgeplündert worden ist.
Man hat uns unterdrückt und geschunden. Man hat uns eingekerkert und gemartert. Man hat uns hungern lassen. Und ihr werdet...
Propaganda Minister Goebbels, we will not look on much longer while 3.5 million Sudeten Germans are maltreated.
...schöpfen, die ihr nötiger habt als irgendwer anders. Sieg heil! Sieg heil!
Chamberlain's government, afraid another crisis may bring a war it is anxious to avoid, now reverses its position, sends Lord Walter Runciman to Prague on August 3rd to persuade the Czechs to meet Henlein's demands and agree to the secession of the Sudetenland. His mission, uninvited, unwelcome, is doomed to failure. Beneš will not surrender his country to self-destruction. On September 11th, the Sudetens rise in a rebellion ordered by Hitler as a prelude to invasion. Once again, a Jewish population is singled out as a special target. For 4 days, the Sudetens strike and swagger. In London, Chamberlain, awed by the Sudeten show of force, is determined to appease Hitler's demands and ensure the peace. Without consulting his cabinet or the Czechs, who are successfully putting down the Sudetens, he cables Hitler, "Let us meet, let us come to terms." September 15th, 1938, Neville Chamberlain sets out to bargain with Adolf Hitler. War or peace? Europe holds its breath. Which will he bring back from the meeting that lures him to the Bavarian Alps, to Hitler's lair, Berchtesgaden? The next day, Chamberlain returns home, confident that, in his words, Hitler is a man whose word can be relied upon. The meeting is a Nazi victory. Chamberlain, taken in by Hitler's demand for self-determination, has recognized Germany's right to the Sudetenland. Chamberlain welcomes France's Premier Daladier. Despite the French pledge to stand by Czechoslovakia, they agree that the Czechs must give up their Sudetenland. The Czechs, strong in their resolve to resist, reject British and French demands that they submit. In London, public demonstrations as a final French and British ultimatum is issued. If Czechoslovakia fights, she fights alone. Only distant Russia now stands with the Czechs, and that is not enough. Czechoslovakia is deserted. Her only alternative, concession. Chamberlain, satisfied that he has guaranteed peace for a Britain he believes unprepared for war, ignoring the few hecklers, departs for Germany on September 22nd, bearing Hitler the gift of the Sudetenland.
European peace is what I am aiming at, and I hope that this journey may open the way to get it.
Hitler does not expect his demands to be met. Ready to attack, he has ordered German troops to mass at the Czech frontier, while he gives Chamberlain an impressive welcome at Godesberg. Sir Ivone Kirkpatrick, British diplomat who was there, describes the meeting.
We arrived at the Dresden Hotel. The whole of the Third Reich, all the nabobs were gathered there together, and Hitler led us up a little stairs and into a vast room with a long baize table, and we sat up at the top of the table at the end of this room. And Hitler looked at Chamberlain as if to say, well, it's your move. Chamberlain said, well, when we parted, I undertook to get the assent of these various governments to the cession of Sudetenland to you, and I'm very happy to tell you that I've succeeded. And now it only remains for us to discuss how this transfer is going to be organized. Now that was translated, and then there was a silence, and Hitler frowned like that and said, I'm very sorry, but that's no good anymore. That was the beginning of the Godesberg Conference, which proceeded on those lines, and it terminated with Hitler producing his demands in writing, which had the character of an ultimatum. Well, Chamberlain told him that this was an ultimatum, and that a man who'd always been inveighing against the ultimatum of Versailles wasn't in a position really to impose an ultimatum on Czechoslovakia that hadn't even lost a war. So at that point, Hitler then pulled a pair of spectacles out of his pocket. It was the first time I'd ever seen him wear a pair of spectacles. He got a pencil and he went through the paper, altering it in form, but not in substance. And when he'd finished, he tossed the paper over the table to Chamberlain, saying in a very furious voice, "You're the only man to whom I've ever made a concession in all my life." Well, we parted on that, and although Chamberlain didn't like the memorandum and said it was unacceptable, he said he couldn't refuse to submit it to the Czech government. The Czech government rejected the memorandum, and it looked as if war was then certain.
Hitler prepares for invasion, confident of the appeasement policy of Britain and France. His ultimatum sets October 1st as the deadline for his occupation of the Sudetenland. In Czechoslovakia, 1.5 million men are quickly called up, unwilling to accept Hitler's new demands, ready to face his deadline. France and England reject Hitler's ultimatum, dig in, prepare for war. On September 27th, a weary Chamberlain addresses his people.
How horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. it seems still more impossible that a quarrel which is already settled in principle should be the subject of war. If we have to fight, it must be on larger issues than that. I am myself a man of peace to the depths of my soul. Armed conflict between nations is a nightmare to me. But if I were convinced that any nation had made up its mind to dominate the world by fear of its force, I should feel that it must be resisted. Under such a domination, life for people who believe in liberty would not be worth living. But war is a fearful thing, and we must be very clear before we embark on it that it is really the great issues that are at stake. For the present, I ask you to wait as calmly as you can for the events of the next few days. As long as war has not begun, there is always hope that it may be prevented, and you know that I am going to work for peace till the last moment.
September 29th, in a last bid for peace, Chamberlain sets off for the international conference at Munich, called by Hitler, who has been warned again by his generals that Germany is not yet strong enough to fight. Of this, England and France are ignorant. Unprepared for war, buying time, they are prepared for appeasement. With the arrival of Chamberlain and Daladier on September 29th, the curtain goes up on the drama at Munich. Partners Mussolini and Hitler welcome the visitors. Excluded and ignored are Czechoslovakia and her ally, Russia, still pledging support. Czechoslovakia is sacrificed on the altar of appeasement in the signing of the pact Winston Churchill calls a complete surrender to the Nazi threat of force that will bring peace or security neither to England nor to France. 4 men sign the pact. How do they behave on this historic occasion? Sir Ivone Kirkpatrick.
Chamberlain, I think, was mortified at the situation in which he found himself, mortified also at having to communicate the result of the conference to the Czech representative who was in Munich. Daladier, on the other hand, looked very much like a man who'd been reprieved, the man in the death cell to whom the governor announces that he's not going to be executed after all. Mussolini was very cocky. He felt he'd really been the author of the Munich agreement and that this was his day. And he was strutting about very much like a sort of bantam cock. Was the author of the whole thing. Hitler, on the other hand, was absolutely furious. At the time of signature, incidentally, there was no ink in the inkstand. He went off to sit by himself on a sofa where he was making gestures of frustration and annoyance and scowling into space. And as we left the Führerbau at the end of the evening, I left a very angry Führer who looked like a man who'd been asked to sign away his birthright.
Large sections of Czechoslovakia are devoured by Germany in accordance with the Munich Agreement. Poland and Hungary are then invited to join in the feast. Czechoslovakia has been thrown to the wolves. October 1st, the date scheduled for invasion, need not be met. German troops are welcomed by the Sudeten Nazis. The widening shadow of appeasement soon covers the land. On March 15th, 1939, the shadow of a once proud Czech government delivers all of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. A year of illusory peace has been bought at Munich. For Czechoslovakia, the cost is high. Ahead lies Nazi occupation, a fleeting post-war peace, then communist takeover. Free Czechoslovakia has ceased to exist. In the words of Winston Churchill, silent, mournful, abandoned, broken, Czechoslovakia recedes into the darkness.
Our next chapter in this compilation, The Seeds of War, focuses on the American president during this time of crisis. The president, of course, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Two questions most on the mind of Americans in the summer of 1940 were, would FDR run for an unprecedented third term, and would the United States become involved in the war?
July 15th, Chicago, the Democratic Convention. FDR stays away but keeps posted via a private wire to Harry Hopkins. Then July 17th, the sweating delegates get what they have been waiting for.
I place in nomination the valiant American Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
The vote is a landslide. FDR 946, Farley 72, Garner 61. And now Roosevelt accepts by radio.
Like most men of my age, I have made plans for myself. Plans for a private life of my own choice.
These plans, like so many other plans, had been made in a world that now seems as distant as another planet. For today, all private plans, all private lives have been, in a sense, repealed by an overriding public danger. In the face of that public danger, all those who can be of service to the Republic have no choice but to offer themselves for service in those capacities for which they may be fitted.
But millions aren't buying FDR or his third term. The Republicans have an articulate and attractive candidate in Wendell Willkie.
I propose that during the next 2.5 months, the President and I appear on public platforms together in various parts of the country.
But Roosevelt, irritating Willkie and alarming some Democrats, declines open battle with the Republicans. The president, to Republican scoffing, claims he is too busy being commander-in-chief for politicking. France has fallen. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. September 16th, 1940. A fateful day for almost every American home. Roosevelt signs the Selective Service Act, the draft, political dynamite in an election year. Willkie hammers away at him on other issues.
7.5 years now, every year, a mounting federal public debt. Is there anybody here so damn dumb that thinks that can go on for 4 more years?
The man from Indiana begins to lose his voice, but he keeps punching at 2 spots: unemployment, unpreparedness.
More than 9 million of our fellow citizens are without jobs. We have little equipment for an army, and we have only a few hundred modern military airplanes. That is the record, and I challenge the third-term candidate to prove it false.
Willkie, far behind in early public opinion polls, begins to catch up. Democrats, without Roosevelt speaking, are hard put to answer his charges against FDR. Anti-business, third-term dictator, appeaser, and then, in a shift, warmonger. Politicians demand the famous Roosevelt oratory. He agrees to make only 5 speeches. The campaign catches fire.
I consider it a public duty to answer falsifications with facts. I will not pretend that I find this an unpleasant duty. I am an old campaigner, and I love a good fight. The overwhelming majority of Americans will not be scared by this blitzkrieg of verbal incendiary bombs. I repeat again that I stand on the platform of our party. We will not participate in foreign wars, and we will not send our army, naval, or air forces to fight in foreign lands outside of the Americas, except in case of attack.
And let me tell you something else. That one-man rule always leads to. It always leads to the road to war.
While I'm talking to you, fathers and mothers, I give you one more assurance. I have said this before, but I shall say it again and again and again. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign war. Yes, we are telling the world that we are free, and we intend to remain free and at peace. We are free to live and love and laugh. We face the future with confidence and with courage. We are Americans.
Listeners note that this time FDR does not add, except in case of attack, after no foreign war. Critics try to pin him down. He replies, if somebody attacks us, then it is not a foreign war. Election night, 1940. FDR sweeps to a third term. 27 million to Wilkie's 22. 38 states to Wilkie's 10. As usual, he gets the news at his family home in Hyde Park. Despite his great endorsement by the American electorate, the result does not end the sharp divisions in the nation. Britain now stands alone against Germany. Roosevelt wants to send all aid short of war. December 29th, 1940.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
Backing Roosevelt and Secretary of State Hull on this international issue is Wendell Willkie, the political opponent of only a few months ago. He testifies before a Senate committee.
That providing the aid we give to Britain is effective, it offers the best, the very best, clear chance for us to keep out of war. Hitler, in my judgment, will make war on us or on our friends and allies in this hemisphere when, as, and if he chooses.
Millions are in opposition, among them Republican Senators Robert Taft of Ohio, Gerald Nye of North Dakota, a vocal and relentless foe, and Michigan's Arthur Vandenberg. Later, he will become a staunch supporter of overseas aid. The chief executive is beset on several sides. there are still 7,600,000 unemployed. There is hostility among some men drafted unwillingly into a peacetime army. March 1941, Lend-Lease comes before Congress, passes both houses easily. It enables the president to furnish war materiel to any country whose defense he deems vital to the United States. Overage destroyers already have been traded for leases on British Atlantic bases. Plowing under every fourth American boy, this embittered opponent calls it.
The American people now know that this bill not only gave the president dictatorial powers, but also gave him the right to carry on an undeclared war all over the world.
The isolationists organize. There are several committees, the largest being America First. A smaller but aggressive group is this one.
But I want radio time. My God, the people who want peace ought to have a chance to say so, as contrasted to the people who are in the committee to defend America by destroying it.
America First attracts varied supporters. Its principal advocate is an idol who will resign his Air Corps commission to carry on the fight.
We have divided our own people by this dabbling in Europe's wars. While we should have been concentrating on American defense, we have been forced to argue over foreign quarrels. We must turn our eyes and our faith back to our own country before it is too late.
The president refuses to change course in the face of what he calls the present danger. On May 27, 1941, he proclaims an unlimited national emergency. The national division is profoundly complex. There are isolationists and interventionists in both parties. Strange bedfellows are found on the political scene. With the Nazi-Soviet pact still in force, the domestic communists and fellow travelers are more isolationist than anybody. This from a New York leftist congressman.
We are not preparing for the defense of our country, but rather we are preparing to plunge our people into a war not for democracy, but for imperialism.
Communists also seek to inspire strikes in vital industries, choking off supplies to the Allies. At North American Aviation in California, they succeed. For the first time, Roosevelt has to send in federal troops. Communists, still guided by the Nazi-Soviet alliance, try to move in on youth organizations, stir up trouble wherever possible. Then the morning of June 22nd, 1941. Now the communists are more interventionist than anybody. August 10th, 1941, off Newfoundland. The famous Atlantic Charter meeting takes place between Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. They established an easy intimacy, writes one observer. They were two men in the same line of business, politico-military leadership on a global scale. At home, the war draws closer. The National Guard is called up. The one-year draft is extended by a perilous one-vote margin in the House, ending the soldiers' chant, Ohio, O-H-I-O, over the hill in October.
Say, Mac, what time do we get up in the morning?
Don't worry, I'll get you up.
Training goes forward, but at times with imitation weapons. In some cases, manpower exceeds supplies. November 14th, 1941, the tension mounts. In San Francisco, Saburo Kurusu arrives en route to Washington as special envoy from Japan. He reaches the capital on November 15th.
you all know how difficult my mission is. But I'll do all I can to make it a successful one for the sake of two countries, Japan and the United States.
November 17th, 11 a.m., the White House. Hall takes Kurusu and Ambassador Nomura to see the president. They defend Japan's China policy and its Axis Treaty with Germany and Italy. General Marshall and others have been trying to persuade Secretary Stimson to recommend to FDR a 3-month stall in the Pacific, time to bolster the Philippines and other bases. Stimson opposes this as appeasement. November 20th, 10:45 a.m., the State Department. The Japanese have an important meeting with Hull to present their demands. Unfreezing of Japanese assets in the United States, lifting of the oil embargo, immediate cessation of U.S. aid to China. At this moment, the Japanese fleet has rendezvoused for the sail to Pearl Harbor. November 22nd, the Navy Department. A secret message from Foreign Minister Togo to Nomura is intercepted and decoded. It describes the note to Hull as an ultimatum, a last effort to prevent something happening. Deadline, 1 week, November 29th, 1941. The same day, the White House. The broken code message is rushed to the president. November 25th, noon, the White House. Hull arrives, followed by the military leaders. A 3-month stall in the Pacific will be rejected for fear it will encourage Japanese aggressions and damage the morale of the Chinese. Hull is advised to meet the Japanese demands with a counter-proposal. November 26th, 4:45 p.m., the State Department. Hull calls for Japanese withdrawal from China and Indochina. The Japanese task force is on its way to Pearl Harbor. November 27th, 2 p.m., the White House. With Hull, the Japanese envoys arrive to meet with the president. Roosevelt warns the envoys that if Japan persists in following Hitlerism and aggression, she will be the ultimate loser. Admiral Stark has sent his war warning to Admirals Hart and Kimmel in the Pacific, telling them an aggressive move is expected within the next few days. The tense days pass. Japan's task force steams toward Pearl Harbor. December 6th, Roosevelt makes a vain peace appeal directly to Emperor Hirohito. Then December 7th, the State Department, 12:55 p.m. In Hawaii, the Japanese bombs will drop in 30 minutes. 1 p.m., Hull has a date with the Japanese. They phone for a postponement until 2 p.m. It is 1:05 p.m. 1:50 p.m., the Navy Department. Message from Admiral Kimmel in Honolulu. Air raid on Pearl Harbor. This is not drill. 1:55 p.m., the White House. FDR has received the news by phone from Knox. He telephones Hull, tells him to receive the Japanese coldly, but not to mention the attack. (2:20 p.m., the State Department. The Japanese hand Hull their note. In a Tennessee tongue-lashing, he condemns them for infamous falsehoods and distortions on a scale never imagined. (2:25 p.m., the White House. The story breaks. 3 p.m., Press Secretary Steve Early begins holding a series of news conferences that will run through the day. (3 p.m., the Japanese embassy. The staff is burning secret documents to keep them out of American hands. Later, one Japanese official tries to knife a Secret Service man at the railroad station. 3 p.m., the White House. The news is on the radio. Crowds, tight-faced and silent, gather outside the iron gates. Hull arrives to see the president. Stimson, Knox, Stark, and Marshall will join him there. The worried officials move inside to the president's study, now the nerve center of the American war effort. They will learn how badly we have been hurt at Pearl Harbor. Later, the cabinet meets to be joined by legislative leaders of both parties. The meetings go on past midnight. December 7th, 1941, passes fatefully into history. The nation waits for word from its commander-in-chief, the President of the United States. December 8th, noon, the Capitol. As Franklin Roosevelt comes to address Congress, he has behind him more national unity than he has known since the first 100 days of the New Deal. More than he will know again, despite a fourth endorsement by the American electorate. With one military stroke, Japan has done what Roosevelt could not do. The gaining of that inevitable triumph, the battles, the bloodshed, the bravery, is the story we're reporting in this continuing series, the CBS Video Library of World War II. I'm Walter Cronkite.